Jonathan Parker's consciousness flickered back to life like a dying light bulb struggling to illuminate a darkened room. The first sensation that struck him was the sterile scent of antiseptic, sharp and overwhelming, mingling with the faint sweetness of artificial flowers. As his eyes fluttered open, he was met with the blinding brightness of fluorescent lights overhead, their unyielding glare intensifying the confusion swirling in his mind. He turned his head slightly, and the motion sent a jolt of pain through his temples, like a hammer striking an anvil. The room around him slowly came into focus, a modest hospital room with pale green walls, a window draped with thin curtains, and medical equipment beeping rhythmically nearby. The sound felt foreign, mechanical, as if it belonged to another world entirely. "Mr. Parker, can you hear me?" A soft voice broke through the haze, and he turned his gaze to a nurse standing by his bedside. Her face was kind, though worry etched her features, and her name tag read, "Linda." "Where am I?" Jonathan croaked, his throat dry as sandpaper. Panic began to bubble within him as he realized he couldn't recall anything, his name, his life, or even how he had ended up here. "You're in the hospital," Linda explained gently, her tone soothing. "You were in a car accident. You've sustained a concussion and, unfortunately, it seems you've lost your memory." "Memory lost?" Jonathan echoed, trying to grasp the enormity of her words. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He was a blank slate, a stranger even to himself. What happened? "You were driving late at night and the details are still unclear," she said, glancing at the clipboard she held. "But you hit a tree. Fortunately, you survived, but your memory may take time to return." It's not uncommon after a head injury. Jonathan's heart raced as he absorbed this information. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him like a heavy fog. I don't remember anything," he whispered, the admission tasting bitter on his tongue. Linda offered a sympathetic smile. "That's okay, Mr. Parker. We'll take it one step at a time. Just focus on resting and getting better. Your mind will heal." As she spoke, Jonathan felt a nagging sensation at the back of his mind, a flicker of something elusive. But before he could grasp it, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside his room, pulling his attention away from the nurse. The door swung open, and a man stepped in, his demeanor somber and serious. "Dr. Reynolds," the man announced, extending his hand toward Jonathan, who struggled to sit up slightly in his bed. "I'm your physician. How are you feeling today?" I don't know," Jonathan stammered, feeling a surge of frustration at his inability to articulate his thoughts. "I can't remember anything." The doctor nodded, his expression grave. "That's not unusual under the circumstances. We'll conduct some tests to assess your cognitive function, but I must warn you that memory loss can be complex. It might return gradually, or some aspects may remain elusive." As Dr. Reynolds spoke, Jonathan's attention wandered, catching snippets of a conversation that unfolded behind the doctor. A man dressed in a dark suit stood just outside the door, his face taut with concern. "A significant loss for the company," the man muttered, his voice low and laced with urgency. "If he doesn't recover soon, we may face serious repercussions." Jonathan's heart sank at the words. "Company? What company?" The realization hit him that he might have been someone important, someone whose absence would cause a ripple effect. "Mr. Parker?" Dr. Reynolds prompted, pulling Jonathan back from the edge of his thoughts. "Are you with me?" Jonathan forced a nod, though he felt anything but present. "What does he mean? What company?" The doctor exchanged a glance with the man in the suit before responding. "You were a businessman, a successful one, I believe, but we need to focus on your recovery right now." "Successful?" Jonathan repeated. The word felt both foreign and tantalizing. Was he wealthy? Powerful? The idea both thrilled and terrified him. But before he could delve deeper into that thought, the man in the suit stepped forward, his eyes narrowing with intensity. "Jonathan, you need to come home," he said, his voice commanding yet tinged with an underlying desperation. "We can't afford any delays. The board is restless and they need you back." "Home?" Jonathan echoed, feeling a wave of instinctive aversion wash over him. Home felt like a concept too large, too distant, and the man's urgency was unsettling. "Yes, you're home," the man insisted, his expression unyielding. "You have responsibilities to uphold, and we need you back at the helm." Jonathan recoiled slightly, a strange instinct flaring within him. I don't know who I am. I can't just go back to something I don't even remember." The man's eyes darkened, frustration flaring. "You're Jonathan Parker, the CEO of Parker Enterprises. You've built an empire, and you can't just abandon it. Your legacy is at stake." "Legacy?" Jonathan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The weight of that word felt suffocating, as if it held the burden of expectations he couldn't begin to fathom. "I think I need to understand who I am before I can do anything." "You'll remember," the man replied, his tone a mix of impatience and determination. "Just give it time. But you need to return to your life." Before Jonathan could respond, the doctor interjected, concern lining his face. "Now is not the time for pressure. Mr. Parker needs to focus on healing. We'll discuss further steps when he's ready." The man in the suit hesitated, frustration flickering across his features, but he ultimately relented. "Fine, but we'll be waiting for you." With that, he turned and left the room, the door closing with a soft click that echoed in the silence. Jonathan sank back against his pillows, his heart racing. The world outside felt like a distant echo, a reality he was no longer a part of. What had once defined him now felt foreign, like a distant dream slipping through his fingers. As the doctor began to explain the next steps of his recovery, Jonathan's mind wandered again, reeling from the implications of his supposed past. Who was he really? What kind of man had he been? The questions spiraled endlessly, leaving him feeling more lost than ever. Hours later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the hospital room, Jonathan was finally discharged. He stood at the entrance, a tangle of emotions coursing through him. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and a hint of something familiar, yet distant. A sleek black car idled by the curb, its polished surface reflecting the fading light. A driver stepped out, his demeanor professional and slightly apprehensive. "Mr. Parker, I'm here to take you home." Home. The word echoed ominously in Jonathan's mind. He hesitated, taking a step back as a wave of instinctive aversion washed over him. The luxury of the car felt foreign, a world apart from the simplicity he craved in that moment. I think I need some time," he finally said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'm not ready to go back yet." The driver's expression flickered with surprise, but he quickly masked it with a polite nod. "Of course, sir. Just let me know when you're ready." Jonathan watched as the driver returned to the car, the engine purring softly. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. The world he was being drawn back into felt overwhelming, a labyrinth of expectations and obligations he couldn't yet navigate. Turning away from the vehicle, he took a step toward the sidewalk, a newfound determination igniting within him. For the first time, he felt a sense of agency, a longing to discover who he truly was beyond the confines of wealth and status. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was his to embrace. Jonathan stood at the threshold of his grand home, an imposing structure that spoke of wealth and status. The marble floors glistened under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with paintings that seemed to whisper secrets of a life he could no longer remember. As he stepped inside, a wave of cold air swept over him, as if the house itself was disapproving of his presence. He was surrounded by opulence, yet it felt alien, a stark reminder of the memories that eluded him. He wandered through the expansive rooms, his fingertips grazing the surfaces of expensive furniture, feeling the texture of luxury without the warmth of familiarity. Each family photo he passed felt like a phantom, faces smiling back at him, yet devoid of any connection. He paused in front of a large frame that depicted a family gathering. A woman with bright eyes and a radiant smile stood at the center, her arm draped over a younger Jonathan. He squinted, trying to force a memory to the surface, but all he felt was a profound emptiness. "Who are you?" he murmured to the image, his voice barely echoing in the silence. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as he felt the weight of his isolation settle in his chest. He turned away, overwhelmed, and made his way toward the door that led to the backyard, hoping the fresh air could clear the fog that clouded his mind. Outside, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the meticulously manicured garden. Flowers bloomed vibrantly, their colors a stark contrast to the dullness that surrounded his thoughts. Jonathan's gaze traveled down the street, where laughter and chatter floated through the air, sounds of life that seemed so distant from his own. It was then that he spotted the community center at the end of the block, a modest building that seemed to pulse with activity, a stark contrast to the opulence of his home. Driven by an instinct he couldn't quite grasp, Jonathan began walking toward it, each step feeling more liberating than the last. As he approached, he could see a group of people gathered outside, their faces illuminated with joy and purpose. A woman with a bright smile caught his eye, her energy infectious. She was organizing a group of volunteers, handing out bags and directing people with an enthusiasm that drew him in. "Hey there, you look like you could use some fresh air," she called out to him, her voice warm and inviting. Jonathan hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but her friendly demeanor eased some of the tension within him. I'm just exploring," he replied, his voice softer than he intended. "What are you all doing?" "We're getting ready for a food drive. Would you like to join us?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "I'm Mia, by the way." "Jonathan," he introduced himself, feeling an unfamiliar spark of interest ignite within him. "A food drive?" "Yes. We collect food donations for families in need in the neighborhood. It's a great way to connect with the community and make a difference," she explained, her passion evident. "Come on, join us. We could use an extra hand." Before he could think twice, Jonathan found himself nodding. "Sure, I'd love to help." The words felt foreign on his tongue, yet liberating. As he stepped into the throng of volunteers, he felt a sense of belonging that had been missing since he woke up in that hospital room. The day flew by as Jonathan immersed himself in the work. He helped sort through donations, organizing cans and boxes, and he found himself laughing and chatting with the other volunteers. Mia was a whirlwind of energy, and her positivity was contagious. "You're a natural at this," she exclaimed as they worked side by side, her laughter ringing in the air. "Have you done this before?" "No," he admitted, a smile creeping onto his face. "But it feels good. I've never felt like this before." "Good is just the beginning," she grinned, handing him a box to lift. "When you see the smiles on people's faces when they receive the food, it's a whole new level of fulfillment." Jonathan nodded, absorbing her words. For the first time in what felt like ages, he felt a sense of purpose awaken within him, a stark contrast to the hollow existence he had felt at home. As they continued to work, he listened to the stories shared by the other volunteers, stories of hope, resilience, and the power of community. Each anecdote wove a fabric of connection, drawing him into a world he hadn't known he was missing. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the community center, Jonathan felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. The day had been a revelation, a glimpse into the life he could lead beyond the confines of his past. "Thank you for inviting me, Mia," he said as they wrapped up for the day. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." She beamed at him, her enthusiasm unwavering. "Any time, Jonathan. We're always looking for more hands. You should come back tomorrow." "I will," he promised, feeling an unexpected excitement course through him. As he walked back home, the shadows of the evening creeping in, he reflected on how different the day had been compared to his life before the accident. Back at the house, the cold opulence felt even more stifling than before. He wandered through the rooms trying to reconcile the warmth he felt at the community center with the emptiness of his home. He stopped in front of the family photos once more, studying the faces that looked back at him. Each smile felt like a question mark, a reminder of the memories he longed to recover. "What was I like?" he whispered to himself, the silence answering with a resounding void. But something had shifted. The emptiness felt less daunting now. He had glimpsed a different kind of life, one filled with purpose and connection. The following days blurred into a routine of volunteering. Jonathan returned to the community center, diving headfirst into the work, reveling in the camaraderie of the volunteers. Each day brought new challenges and laughter, and with Mia by his side, he felt more alive than ever. They spent hours sorting donations, picking up food from local businesses, and even engaging with families in need. Jonathan felt a sense of fulfillment that eluded him in his previous life of luxury and isolation. One afternoon, as they organized a big shipment of food, Mia turned to him, her expression serious. "You know, you could really make a difference here. Have you thought about taking a more active role in the organization?" Jonathan paused, considering her words. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. I mean, I still have so much to figure out about myself." "You're already doing it, Jonathan," she encouraged. "You're here, you're helping, and you're connecting with people. That's what matters. This community needs someone like you." Her words hung in the air, resonating deep within him. For the first time since the accident, Jonathan felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps he could redefine himself, not as the wealthy businessman who had once lived a life of solitude, but as a man committed to something greater than himself. "Maybe I can," he replied slowly, the thought taking root in his mind. As he looked around at the bustling activity and the joyful interactions, he realized that this was the life he had been searching for. The emptiness that had once consumed him began to fill with purpose, connection, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. That evening, Jonathan returned home, the familiar shadows of his mansion no longer feeling suffocating. Instead, they felt like a cocoon, one he was ready to break free from. He glanced at the family photos, not with despair but with curiosity. "I will find you," he whispered to the faces, determination igniting a spark within him. He was ready to embrace this new chapter, to uncover the man he was meant to be, one connection at a time. As the days unfolded at the community center, Jonathan found himself drawn deeper into the rhythm of this new life. The warm glow of the center, filled with laughter and the sound of busy volunteers, stood in stark contrast to the sterile quietness of the hospital room where he had awakened. It was here, among the people who had very little but shared everything, that Jonathan began to feel a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. Mia had quickly become a guiding light in Jonathan's life. Her laughter was infectious, and her passion for helping others was palpable. One afternoon, while they were sorting through boxes of donated clothes, Mia turned to him, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "You know, John, you have a gift for this. You connect with people in a way that makes them feel valued." Jonathan smiled, a warmth spreading through him at her words. "I'm not sure about that. I just try to help where I can." Mia shook her head, her curls bouncing with the movement. "No, really. You should see the way the kids light up when you show up. They look up to you." She paused, her expression softening. "You're not just helping them. You're inspiring them." He glanced at the group of children playing in the corner of the center, their laughter ringing through the air. They had begun to gravitate towards him, wanting to hear stories or simply to play. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Jonathan felt a swell of pride. "I suppose I never thought of it that way," he admitted, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "You're doing more than you realize," Mia encouraged, her tone earnest. "You're building a community. You're becoming part of something bigger than yourself." Jonathan nodded, letting her words sink in. He had always been driven by ambition, by the relentless pursuit of success. Yet, as he watched Mia interact with the volunteers and the children, he began to understand that this was a different kind of fulfillment, one that did not revolve around wealth or status. It was about connection, compassion, and the simple joy of making a difference. As the weeks passed, Jonathan found himself contemplating his past life more frequently. The shimmering skyscrapers, the lavish parties, the cutthroat board meetings, none of it resonated with him anymore. He recalled the hollow victories, the late nights spent working, and the endless drive for more. Despite the wealth that surrounded him, he had felt an emptiness that gnawed at him like a persistent shadow. One evening, while organizing donations, Jonathan stumbled upon a dusty box tucked away in a corner of the storage room. Curiosity piqued. He pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside, he found an old journal, its leather cover worn and cracked, its pages yellowed with age. He hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to delve into his past, but the curiosity was overwhelming. As he flipped through the pages, his heart raced. The entries were filled with notes about business ventures, financial projections, and philanthropic aspirations. There were scribbled ideas for charitable foundations he had hoped to establish, initiatives to help underprivileged communities, and plans for sustainable investments. Yet, as he read, a heavy realization settled over him. Each page echoed with ambition, but lacked the warmth of genuine connection. "Hey, what did you find?" Mia's voice broke through his thoughts, and he looked up to see her standing beside him, her brow furrowed with curiosity. "It's my old journal," he replied, a hint of sadness in his voice. "I didn't remember I had this." Mia leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the pages. "This is incredible. You had so many ideas, but it seems like you were always chasing something." Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was. I thought success would make me happy. But now, looking back, it all feels so empty. I was so focused on the next big deal, the next promotion. I missed out on what really mattered." Mia placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're here now, John. You're doing something real, something that matters. It's never too late to change your path." Her words resonated within him, stirring something deep. He glanced back at the journal, the inked aspirations of a man he barely recognized. "I thought I needed wealth to make an impact, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's the connections we make that truly matter." "Exactly," Mia exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. "You're already making a difference just by being here. You're showing these kids that they matter, that they're seen." Jonathan smiled faintly, but a flicker of uncertainty remained. "But what do I do with this? I can't just ignore my past." "No, of course not. But you can learn from it. Use your experiences to shape who you are now," she encouraged. "You've got the chance to redefine your legacy." As they continued to sort through the donations, Jonathan felt a sense of clarity washing over him. The memories of his past were still there, but they no longer held him captive. Instead, they became stepping stones, guiding him towards a future filled with purpose. Days turned into weeks, and Jonathan became a familiar face at the community center. His bond with Mia deepened, and he found himself looking forward to their conversations, each one revealing layers of understanding about himself and the world around him. He began to recognize the beauty in the small moments, watching a child learn to ride a bike, sharing stories over a meal, or simply lending an ear to someone in need. One afternoon, as they prepared for an upcoming food drive, Jonathan paused, watching Mia as she animatedly explained the details to a group of volunteers. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating her features. He felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. "Mia," he called out, interrupting her flow. She turned, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Yes?" "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "Thank you for believing in me, for helping me see what I couldn't." Mia's expression softened and she smiled. "You're the one who did the hard work, John. I just pointed you in the right direction." As they continued their preparations, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that his life was finally on the right track. The community, the connections he was forming, and the sense of belonging he had found were reshaping him in ways he had never imagined. He was no longer the man defined by his wealth, but rather someone who found joy in giving and receiving love, creating a legacy built on compassion rather than currency. In the background, the laughter of children echoed through the center, a melody of hope and possibility. Jonathan felt a stirring within him, a deep-rooted understanding that he was exactly where he needed to be. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the community center, he looked around at the faces of those who had become his new family and realized that this was his true fortune. Jonathan sat cross-legged on the floor of the community center, the sunlight filtering through the large windows casting a warm glow around him. The journal lay open on his lap, its pages filled with his own handwriting, neat, precise, and yet foreign. As he read the entries, an avalanche of emotions washed over him. Nostalgia clawed at his heart, alongside a heavy weight of regret. The man he had been, CEO, philanthropist, and socialite, seemed like a ghost, haunting the pages with ambitions and dreams that felt utterly disconnected from the man he was becoming. Why did I think that was enough? He murmured to himself, tracing a finger over the words he had penned years ago. Success. Power. They meant everything to me then. Jonathan could almost hear the echo of his past self, a voice filled with confidence and entitlement, demanding to be heard. But here, in this moment, surrounded by the laughter of children and the warmth of genuine human connection, he felt nothing but confusion. Mia walked into the room, her ponytail bouncing with energy. "Hey, Jonathan, you're still here. I thought I'd find you holed up in the back office." She paused, her eyes landing on the open journal, curiosity piqued. "What are you reading?" He hesitated, unsure if he wanted to share the contents of the journal. "It's my journal," he finally said, his voice heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts. "It's all about my life, before the accident." Mia sat beside him, her expression softening. "What's it like? Reading about who you used to be?" Jonathan sighed, a deep, resonating sound that spoke of his internal conflict. "It's strange. I read about my business ventures, my philanthropic efforts, and all these goals I had, but I can't connect with the person who wrote this. I don't even recognize him." "Maybe that's a good thing," Mia suggested gently. "You're not that guy anymore. You've changed, and it sounds like you're finding something more meaningful here." He looked at her, searching for understanding. "But was I really that disconnected?" He gestured to the journal. "This man was successful, but he was also lonely. I read about parties, meetings, and accolades, but I don't read about friends or joy. It all feels so hollow." Mia's expression turned serious. "Jonathan, sometimes success can come at a cost. It's easy to get lost in the pursuit of wealth and status. You're not that man now, and I think that's a blessing. Look at what you're building here. Real connections, real impact." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Maybe I needed to lose everything to find out what really mattered. But then there's a part of me that feels ashamed of who I was." "Don't be ashamed," she said, her voice firm yet kind. "You're not that man anymore. You're someone who cares, who wants to help others. That's what counts now." Before Jonathan could respond, the door swung open and a well-dressed man stepped inside. His sharp suit contrasted sharply with the casual atmosphere of the community center. Jonathan recognized him immediately. Ethan Blake, a former business associate from his old life. The sight of him sent a ripple of anxiety through Jonathan's stomach. "Jonathan Parker," Ethan exclaimed, a mix of surprise and concern painted across his face. "I heard you were back in town. I can't believe it." He approached, extending a hand, but Jonathan remained seated, feeling a mix of emotions swirling within him. "Ethan," Jonathan replied, his voice steady but guarded. "What brings you here?" "I was just passing by and thought I'd stop in." "It's good to see you," Ethan said, his eyes scanning the room before landing back on Jonathan. "I heard about your accident. It must have been terrifying." "It was," Jonathan admitted, choosing his words carefully. "But I'm okay now." Ethan's expression shifted to one of concern, tinged with something else, perhaps pity. "You know, I've been worried about you. I can only imagine how difficult this must be, losing your memory and everything." Jonathan felt the walls closing in around him. "I'm not the same person I was, Ethan. I've been trying to adjust to this new life." "Yes, but you have a legacy to uphold, Jonathan. You were one of the most influential figures in our industry." "People need you back," Ethan urged, his tone earnest. "Your company needs you back." Jonathan's heart raced. The thought of returning to that world filled him with a mix of dread and longing. "I'm not sure I want that life back, Ethan. I've been spending time with the community here, helping people in a way I never did before." Ethan frowned, clearly struggling to understand. "But this isn't where you belong. You're Jonathan Parker. You built an empire. You have a responsibility." "Responsibility?" Jonathan echoed, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. "What kind of responsibility is that? To chase after wealth while ignoring the needs of those around me? I've realized that I was living in a bubble. It was all about numbers and profit, and I lost sight of what really matters. People." Ethan's brows furrowed in disbelief. "You can't be serious. You've worked your whole life to get where you are. You can't throw it all away for this?" Jonathan stood up, the intensity of his feelings bubbling to the surface. This, he gestured around the community center filled with laughter and warmth, is what I want now. I want to make a difference, to connect with people. My past life felt like a prison. I was successful, but I was also isolated and empty. You'll regret this, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a hint of desperation creeping in. You'll miss the power, the prestige. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Jonathan replied, his tone resolute, but I'd rather be here helping people than return to a life that didn't fulfill me. I'm not the same man anymore, and I don't want to be. As Ethan opened his mouth to respond, Mia stepped in, her presence grounding. Ethan, we appreciate your concern, but Jonathan is on a different path now. He's discovering who he really is, and it's not defined by his past. Ethan's gaze flicked between them, his expression a mix of confusion and frustration. I just don't understand, he said finally, shaking his head. You're throwing away everything you've worked for. Maybe I'm finally learning the difference between what's valuable and what's not, Jonathan replied, his voice steady. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing to build something new. With that, Ethan turned on his heel and left, the door swinging shut behind him with a finality that echoed in Jonathan's mind. Silence enveloped the room, and he felt the weight of Mia's gaze upon him. Are you okay? She asked softly. Jonathan took a deep breath, releasing the tension that had built up during the encounter. I think so. It just feels overwhelming. He's right about one thing, though. I've worked so hard for so long. Letting go is harder than I thought. Mia reached out, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Jonathan. It's okay to feel conflicted. Change is never easy, but you're on a path that feels true to who you are now. He nodded, the reassurance in her voice soothing his frayed nerves. Thank you, Mia. I appreciate you being here. You've helped me see things differently. Anytime, she smiled. Now, how about we get back to organizing that food drive? I could use a partner to keep things lively. Jonathan chuckled, the heaviness in his heart lifting slightly. All right, let's do it. I've got a feeling this is going to be a lot more rewarding than anything I ever did in the corporate world. Together, they returned to the task at hand, Jonathan's heart a little lighter as he stepped further into this new chapter of life, one filled with purpose, connection, and the promise of authenticity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the community center, Jonathan Parker felt a familiar sense of unease creeping in. He had become increasingly entrenched in this new life, one that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The laughter of children playing outside mingled with the soft hum of volunteers organizing supplies for the upcoming fundraiser. Yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, the ghosts of his past, his former business partners, loomed ominously. Jonathan stood near the entrance, watching Mia as she animatedly spoke to a group of volunteers, her hands gesturing excitedly. Her energy was infectious, and he often found himself drawn to her vibrant spirit. She had become his anchor, helping him navigate this unfamiliar and often tumultuous journey of self-discovery. But today, the thought of his past life threatened to overshadow the joy he found in his new existence. Hey, Penny, for your thoughts? Mia's voice broke through his reverie, and he turned to see her standing beside him, her brow slightly furrowed with concern. Jonathan forced a smile. Just thinking about the event. It's a big step, inviting everyone from my old life. Mia studied him for a moment, her blue eyes searching. You're worried about them judging you, aren't you? Or maybe trying to pull you back into that world? He nodded, the weight of his fears pressing down on him. I can't shake the feeling that they'll want me back in the corporate world. I've spent so much time trying to carve out this new identity, and I'm terrified of losing it. Mia placed a reassuring hand on his arm. But this is your chance to show them who you really are now. You've changed, Jonathan. You're not that man anymore. You've found purpose here. A wave of uncertainty washed over Jonathan. He had always been driven by success and status, but those pursuits felt hollow now. What if they don't accept this version of me? What if they see me as weak for choosing this path? Then they don't understand, Mia replied firmly. True strength is in vulnerability, in choosing a life that fills you with joy instead of one that merely fills your pockets. Jonathan appreciated her words, but the echoes of his past still haunted him. The thought of facing his former colleagues, men who had once viewed him as a titan of the corporate world, made his stomach churn. How would they react to the man he had become? He was no longer the ruthless businessman chasing profits. He was a man seeking connection and fulfillment. Later that evening, as the fundraiser began to take shape, the community center buzzed with activity. Jonathan moved through the crowd, greeting familiar faces and newcomers alike. He felt a sense of belonging here that he had never experienced in his previous life. Each smile and handshake reaffirmed his commitment to this new path. "Jonathan, it's been a while," called out a voice from behind him. He turned to see Ethan, one of his former business partners, approaching with a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ethan," Jonathan replied, a mix of surprise and apprehension in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." Ethan's gaze flicked around the room, taking in the vibrant atmosphere. "Well, I heard about the fundraiser and thought it might be good to catch up. See how you've been holding up since everything." Jonathan noted the slight hesitation in Ethan's voice, the unspoken words hanging in the air between them. "I've been doing well, actually. This place has become a big part of my life." "Really?" Ethan's tone was laced with skepticism. "I mean, I'm glad to hear that. But you're wasting your talents here. You were meant for bigger things, Jonathan. The corporate world needs leaders like you." Jonathan felt his heart race. Leaders who exploit others for profit? "I don't think so, Ethan. I'm done with that life." Ethan's smile faltered, and for a moment, Jonathan saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. "You're being naive. You can't just walk away from everything you've built. You have responsibilities, Jonathan. People depend on you." "Do they?" Jonathan shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Or do they depend on the version of me that was only interested in numbers and bottom lines? I don't want to be that man anymore." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of Mia, who seamlessly inserted herself between the two men. "Hey, Jonathan, I need your help with the auction items." "And you, Ethan," she said, her tone shifting to a more casual one. "It's great to see you. Why don't you join us in supporting this cause?" Jonathan allowed Mia to guide him away from Ethan, grateful for her presence. As they moved to the back of the room, Jonathan felt a mixture of relief and frustration. "I didn't expect him to show up tonight," he confessed, shaking his head. Mia looked at him with empathy. "It's hard to break free from the past when it keeps knocking on your door. But remember why you're here. This community needs you and you need them." As the night progressed, Jonathan mingled with guests, sharing stories and laughter. He felt lighter, more alive than he had in years. Yet the specter of his old life lingered, especially as he caught sight of Ethan from across the room, engaged in conversation with other former colleagues. It was time for the auction. Jonathan took a deep breath as he stepped to the front of the room, the spotlight shining down on him. He could feel the weight of their gazes, some filled with curiosity, others with judgment. With a steadying breath, he began to speak. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I am grateful for this chance to support our community and those in need. I've learned a lot in the past few months about what it means to truly live. It's not about the wealth we accumulate or the titles we hold. It's about the connections we make and the lives we touch." As he spoke, Jonathan noticed Ethan's expression hardening. He pressed on, driven by a newfound conviction. "This community has shown me the power of compassion and authenticity, something I lost sight of in my previous life. I hope you'll join me in supporting this cause, not just with your wallets, but with your hearts." The room erupted in applause, and Jonathan felt a swell of pride. This was his moment, a declaration of who he had become. But as he glanced at Ethan, he saw the man's lips pressed into a thin line, the tension in his posture unmistakable. After the auction, as guests began to leave, Jonathan found himself standing at the entrance, engaging in small talk. But his thoughts were still on Ethan, who lingered near the exit, his expression unreadable. "Jonathan," Ethan called, breaking away from a group of former associates. "Can we talk just for a minute?" Jonathan hesitated, but nodded. They stepped outside into the cool night air, the sounds from the community center fading behind them. "What happened to you?" Ethan asked, his voice low, tinged with confusion and concern. "You were a force in the business world. Now, you're here, playing house with charity." Jonathan took a deep breath, grounding himself. "I'm not playing house. I'm finding what really matters. You wouldn't understand." Ethan's brow furrowed. "You're throwing away everything we built together. You're better than this." "Maybe that's the problem," Jonathan replied, his voice steady. "I don't want to be better in the way you define it. I want to be authentic. I want to make a difference, not just profit." Ethan scoffed, crossing his arms. "You think this is enough? Helping a few people here? You could have so much more, Jonathan. More isn't what I want anymore. I want to connect with people, to be part of something bigger than myself. I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the impact we make in others' lives." Ethan stared at him, the conflict evident in his eyes. "You'll regret this, you'll see." Jonathan felt a mix of sadness and determination. "Maybe. But I'd rather take that risk than go back to a life where I felt empty, detached, and alone." With that, he turned back toward the community center, leaving Ethan standing in the darkness, a man tethered to a past that no longer defined him. As he stepped back inside, the warmth of the center enveloped him, a reminder of the purpose he had found. He knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, especially as he faced the realities of his past. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of clarity. He was Jonathan Parker, not the businessman he once was, but a man committed to making a difference, one connection at a time. And that, he realized, was worth everything. The atmosphere in the community center was electric as the fundraiser began to take shape. Colorful balloons floated above tables, laden with donated goods, and the aroma of homemade dishes filled the air. Jonathan Parker was in the middle of it all, feeling a sense of purpose that had eluded him for years. He exchanged smiles and laughter with the volunteers and guests, including Mia, who moved through the room like a ray of sunshine, encouraging everyone to bid generously. "Jonathan," she called out, her voice bright and infectious. "Come here. I need your help with the auction table." He stepped away from a group of familiar faces from his past, their laughter a distant hum in his ears. Something about being with them felt surreal, like watching a movie where he was the lead but had forgotten his lines. "Sure. What do you need?" he replied, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Just help me organize the items. We have some fantastic donations." "I think we can raise a lot tonight," Mia said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. As they worked side by side, Jonathan felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Here among these people, he was valued not for his name or his money, but for who he was becoming. Suddenly, his phone buzzed fiercely in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. The name flashing was unfamiliar, but the urgency in its tone made his heart race. "Excuse me, I need to take this," he said, stepping away from the table. "Everything okay?" Mia asked, concern etched on her face. "Yeah, I'll be right back," he assured her, but his instincts told him otherwise. He answered the call, his pulse quickening. "Hello?" "Jonathan Parker," a deep voice spoke, heavy with authority and malice. "You've been living a lie." "What do you mean?" Jonathan's brow furrowed, confusion turning to unease. "There's something you need to know about your accident. It wasn't an accident at all. It was orchestrated," the voice continued, each word striking Jonathan like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" He struggled to process the implications. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who knows the truth. You were targeted because you were getting in the way of certain plans. Your wealth, your influence, it threatened the wrong people. You were supposed to be out of the picture, but here you are, back at the community center like nothing happened." Jonathan's mind raced, memories of the accident flashing through his thoughts. What was real? What had he lost? "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Because you need to understand. You have power, Jonathan. Power you don't even realize you possess. You can fight back, but you need to be smart about it." The line went silent, leaving Jonathan to wrestle with the enormity of this revelation. He returned to the center, his face pale, and Mia noticed immediately. "Jonathan, what happened?" she asked, taking a step closer. I just received a call. It was about my accident," he stammered, still trying to catch his breath. "What do you mean?" she pressed, her eyes wide with concern. "It was intentional. Someone wanted me out of the way for good." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and the vibrant ambience of the fundraiser dimmed for him. Mia's expression shifted from concern to determination. "We need to figure out who is behind this. You can't let them get away with it." As they spoke, Jonathan's mind began to churn with thoughts. The journal he had found, filled with his past ambitions and philanthropic aspirations, suddenly felt like a lifeline. "I need to read through my journal again," he said, urgency pushing him forward. "There might be clues in there, something I missed." "Let's do it," Mia replied, her resolve unwavering. "I'll help you. You're not alone in this." They quickly found a quiet corner away from the bustling crowd, where Jonathan pulled the journal from his bag. The leather cover felt worn yet comforting in his hands, a connection to the man he was still trying to understand. Flipping through the pages, he sought anything that might point to the people who wanted him gone. "Here," he said, pointing to a section filled with names and companies. "These are my business connections. Some of them seem questionable." Mia leaned in, studying the names closely. "What do you remember about them?" "Not much," Jonathan admitted. "But there's one name that comes up repeatedly. David Hargrove. He's been a rival for years, always trying to undermine my ventures. If he's involved—" "Then we need to confront him," Mia interrupted, her voice steady. "You can't let fear dictate your actions. You're stronger than you think." Jonathan nodded, feeling a spark of determination ignite within him. "You're right. I've been running away from my past instead of facing it. I can't let them control my life anymore, especially not when I'm finally starting to find purpose." As they returned to the fundraiser, Jonathan's demeanor shifted. The fear that had gripped him moments ago transformed into resolve. He walked through the crowd with a new sense of clarity. He was not just Jonathan Parker, a man recovering from an accident. He was a man reclaiming his narrative. During a brief lull in the evening, he spotted David Hargrove standing at the back, a smug expression on his face. The man was chatting with some of the guests, a well-tailored suit clinging to his frame like a second skin. Jonathan felt a surge of anger, recognizing the very embodiment of the corporate world he had distanced himself from. "Let's go talk to him," Jonathan said, his voice low but firm. Mia nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm with you." As they approached, Hargrove turned, his smile faltering when he recognized Jonathan. "Ah, the prodigal son returns," he sneered, feigning surprise. "I heard you were back in town. How's the community service treating you?" Jonathan squared his shoulders, refusing to let Hargrove's condescension affect him. "I know what you did," he stated, his voice steady. "Excuse me?" Hargrove raised an eyebrow, the mockery in his tone unmistakable. "The accident. It wasn't an accident. You wanted me out of the way," Jonathan continued, his heart pounding in his chest. Hargrove's demeanor shifted slightly, revealing a flicker of apprehension. "You're mistaken, Jonathan. You've always been a drama king, living in your fantasy world. Maybe you should take your medication." "Cut the act," Jonathan shot back, his frustration boiling over. "You think I don't know what's going on? I have the power to expose you, and I will." Mia stepped closer, her presence reinforcing Jonathan's courage. "You can't intimidate him anymore, David. This isn't just about Jonathan's past. It's about the lives you've affected. We're not backing down." Hargrove's expression darkened, and for a moment Jonathan thought he saw the real man behind the facade. Someone scared of losing control, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You're playing a dangerous game, Parker. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision settle comfortably on his shoulders. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with, and I'm done being afraid. I won't let you dictate my life anymore." With those words, he turned away, a newfound sense of freedom washing over him. He had faced the ghosts of his past, and for the first time, He felt ready to reclaim his future, not just as a businessman, but as a man of integrity. In the days that followed, Jonathan utilized the information from his journal to gather evidence against Hargrove and his associates. With Mia's unwavering support, he began reaching out to the community, forming alliances that transcended the superficial ties of wealth. Together, they organized meetings, raising awareness about corporate greed and manipulation, and drawing in members of the community who had shared similar experiences. The sense of purpose that had ignited within Jonathan began to spread, creating a ripple effect of empowerment. As he stood before a crowd one evening, addressing the importance of unity and integrity, Jonathan felt a profound connection to these people, strangers who had become family. He was no longer just reclaiming his identity. He was forging a new one, rooted in the authenticity of shared experiences and a commitment to change. "I may have lost my memory, but I found something far more valuable," he declared, his voice echoing through the room. "I've found purpose, and it's in serving this community, standing together against those who seek to exploit us. Together, we can create a future built on trust, compassion, and genuine connection." As the crowd erupted in applause, Jonathan looked around, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had come full circle, realizing that true fulfillment was not measured by wealth, but by the lives he touched and the love he shared. The shadows of his past began to fade, replaced by the bright promise of a future he was excited to embrace.